Whose voice is louder, God's or the world's? Let's talk about that on today's 10-Minute Talk. Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's 10-Minute Talk. My name is Pastor Jay Wentworth. I have the privilege of being the lead pastor here at Spirit Alive Church in Yakima, Washington. Please subscribe to this channel, like this video, share these videos every time you hear them so we can spread the word of God. So, this is going to get a little bit technical, okay? Something I really enjoy is running sound or learning about how to run sound for any kind of live show. And something a lot of people don't know, and this is for most professional stage performers, they have these things called in-ears. In-ears are just headphones where the sound is piped directly to the person, and they have what we call their own mix or their own levels so they can hear themselves, so they can hear what they need to hear to do the best they can to represent whatever they're performing, okay? Well, we're having this mix up in our sound system at the church where when the sound guy, his name is Danny, moves the main volume for what everybody can hear, it seems to affect what the individual person is hearing on the stage. In other words, the volume for everybody is controlling the volume for that individual person. And that's not supposed to be the case because then there's really no individual mix for that person, and their point of view of how things are working is entirely clouded. And I believe this happens, hang with me here, when we try to listen to God's voice. I believe that the volume of the world, or how the world controls what we hear, is interfering with our individual communication with God. In other words, it's affecting our opinion and how we see or hear the things around us and how we're supposed to share what we are gifted to share, as the musician is gifted to share whatever they are gifted to share. So in other words, I believe that the world's opinion is clouding what we are supposed to be hearing just from God individually. So how do we get around this? How do we avoid the noise of the world around us affecting what we're supposed to be hearing from God? Well, I know the world is loud. I know the world has so much going on, and it's confusing, and it's madness, and it's distracting, and it causes us to look away from God. But I'm going to argue with you that this is not a volume issue at all. This is not a loudness issue. This is, in the sound world, what we would call a routing issue, or in theology, what we would call a focus or a path issue. You see, there's this thing on the soundboard called routing that tells what signals to go where. So somewhere in that mix, the signal for the world is accidentally getting sent to the individual. And so the wrong path is, the wrong information is going to the individual. And so their focus is on what's going on in the room rather than what's going on between them and God. And there is one way, my friends, to change that routing, to change that path so you can focus on God. And I'm going to reveal that to you right now. Let's look at John 10:27 and Romans 10:17. It says this: "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me." And then Romans 10:17 says, "So faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ." Okay, these are important things to combine together. Let's look at John 10:27, the three things it says. My sheep hear my voice. So first of all, we have to make sure we are following God, that path is set to only follow him because we are his sheep. And we have to listen for specifically his voice to us. All right, it's not just to everybody else, but individually, what is God trying to say to you? And then it says, and I know them. So we need to have a relationship with God. All right. We can't just casually refer to God or see God every now and then or hang out with him just at church. We need to be building that relationship with God. Now, he already knows us, but the relationship works two ways. Okay. And they follow me. So we have to be obedient. We have to abide in God. We have to do what he's saying. In order to be on that correct path and follow him, we're going to have to listen to what he says specifically for us. What is he calling us to do? And we have to make sure we are following that. And then here's kind of the instructions for that, okay? So faith, the following, the believing, the knowing what you hear is from God, comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ. So here's what happens. We are listening to the word of God through the world. In other words, we're hearing other speakers say things about God. We're hearing, no, it's good to have people speak into your life. Don't get me wrong. And it's good to have a pastor to listen to. It's good to have counsel. But your individual time in the world is tailored so that you hear personally what you need to hear from God. Your individual time in private prayer is tailored so you know God, so you hear his voice individually and know what his call is for you. That is your routing. That is your path. Okay. And it is hearing through the word of Christ that's going to allow you to hear his voice clearly and not hear it through the path of the world where it's going to get drowned out by everything else in the world. There is just too much going on. And what happens is because there's false prophets, because there's people speaking truth that's not truth, you're going to start hearing them. There are people who are blending God with other things. We talked about that in our message yesterday. You're going to start hearing them, and it's going to cause the volume of the world to interfere with what you're supposed to be hearing from God individually. In other words, the message from God to you individually is supposed to be speaking to the world through your gift. Instead, you are hearing other people's gifts or curses speaking to you through the world, and it is interfering with how you are hearing the word of God. We have it switched up and backwards. Our path goes God to world, world to me, or enemy to world, world to me. Instead, it should be God to us, us to the world, as we share his word. And then God will reflect back, working through other people in our lives as he sees fit. But friends, individual time in the word, individual time in prayer, and then small group time in the word, small group time in prayer, and then church time in the word, church time in prayer. And then you can hear clearly what the rest of the world is trying to say and whether or not you can really trust that, because now you have that filter of what it's supposed to sound like for you. And you can compare and contrast the two and understand what the truth is, because you hear his voice and you're following him. And though you're in the world, you're following him. And that, friends, is where we get the saying, in the world and not of it. Now, that was a long journey for us to take together right there. That was a lot of information. So let me recap. God has a personal mix, a personal call for you, where you're going to have to spend individual time with him and hear just how it's supposed to be heard by you. But to do that, just like it says in Romans 10:17, your faith has to come from hearing, and the hearing is from the word of Christ. And so you're going to have to spend some serious individual time with God to understand exactly what that call is. And then you can see what parts of the world are going to be good to feed that call, and what parts of the world you're supposed to reach with that call and share your gifts, so that then they begin to understand their individual call and how they need to spend individual time with Jesus. The routing has to be in such a way that your path to Jesus is your path to Jesus. It's not interfered with by the world. Now, you're going to have guides that join you along the way and help keep you focused on Jesus, not focused on them, focused on Jesus. But you got to have that individual time in the Word. You got to have that individual time in prayer and in listening, because you got to listen to hear His voice. So friends, I encourage you, get yourself a daily study routine, get yourself a daily prayer routine, a daily listening routine, so you can hear God's mix in your ears first before you start understanding how to hear the world and how to share your voice and your gift with the world today. Blessings, friends. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.